Happy Parents' Day here in Korea, and you've tuned into Business Daily. I'm Lee in Seoul. Let's get started with a glimpse of today's highlights. Despite a bigger trade deficit, the U.S. imports significantly less from Korea in the first quarter, amid growing concerns that Washington might terminate the Korea-U.S. FTA. Things are not looking so bright on the country's employment front, despite Korea's GDP growth, and we find out why this has been so. These stories and more coming right up. After a holiday-shortened week, the Korean equity market is still having a strong run, posting fresh records yet again on the Kospi. And we're now joined by our markets contributor Choi Jin-seok to talk about overall stock market performance and upcoming market events. Hello, Jin-seok.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so how did the Korean stock market close on the first day of the week?
Both the Kospi and the Kosdaq market continued and maintained their very positive trend in the first session of this week. As you just said, the Kospi logged another record high, closing at 2292.76, surging 2.3% from the last close. The Kosdaq also rose by 1.3%, ending at 643. After starting the session with a slight uptick, the Kospi rose rapidly, recording fresh intraday highs. The Kospi market last week had already hit a record high despite having fewer trading days. It surged by 1.6%, breaking its all-time high in 2011 and surpassing 2240 for the first time ever. Despite concerns about a potential military conflict on the Korean peninsula, foreign investors have been buying massive amounts of shares on the Kospi market to lift the index. Foreigners bought more than 500 billion Korean won worth of stocks to lift the index just below 2,300 today. By size, most blue-chip stocks, excluding POSCO, enjoyed intraday gains, and share prices of Samsung Electronics have risen for 9 consecutive sessions. By sector, pharmaceuticals, food and beverage, transportation, technology, and machinery did well, while construction, steel, and insurance were relatively sluggish.
Now, the biggest political event right here at home will be the presidential election tomorrow. So at this point, we're wondering, how do elections and power transitions in the country typically affect future market movements?
Historically, political transition towards a new administration gives positive momentum to Korea's equity market. Since the 13th presidential election, the Kospi index has skyrocketed by 23 to 26% between the first and second year of a new government. Moreover, the Kospi index rose every single day ahead of the election during the same period. Expectations for policies to revitalize the country's economy and consumption and economic recovery in other countries had lifted the market in early stages of a new administration. Therefore, most experts expect the Kospi market to go even higher, at least for the near term. However, the market turned to negative returns between the third and fourth year of each presidential term. In other words, the market tends to lose steam after each government gets settled.
Now, are there any other market events that might affect sentiment among foreign investors?
The final round of the French presidential election between Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen took place on Sunday local time, and the results showed that Macron won the election by a large margin. Since global financial markets had concerns about Marine Le Pen's far-right party winning the election, Macron's victory is expected to have a very limited impact on the markets going forward. In fact, the euro rose to the highest in 6 months following the results and has been on an uptrend since the first round vote 2 weeks ago. Other than the French election, global investors are expected to pay attention to the U.S. Consumer Price Index reported on Friday because the Federal Reserve has been closely monitoring inflation trends in the country to decide future policies. The Chinese government will unveil the country's price index this week, too. Global oil prices that experienced a sharp decline last week are also likely to be another major factor of interest for this week's market as well.
Now, although not many investors paid close attention to last week's FOMC meeting, but still global monetary policies continue to serve as a dominant factor. So what are some of the related events to this?
After the Fed kept its benchmark interest rate At last week's meeting, more and more investors and experts are projecting a hike in June. Currently, CME Fed Watch, a futures market betting on the rate hikes in the future, shows an 83% possibility of a June hike. Barclays Capital Research also commented on the latest FOMC statement, arguing that the meeting's outcome is extremely important as it signals a higher chance for a June hike. Barclays notes that the statement lacked any tone of uncertainty over the state of the economy or hesitation in its policy path. Along with price data I mentioned earlier, investors are expected to pay a lot of attention to the speeches by Fed officials this week. The list includes St. Louis Fed President James Bullard on Monday, Boston Fed President Eric Rosengren on Tuesday, and New York Fed President William Dudley on Thursday.
Now, first quarter earnings season, both here at home and abroad, are just about to be over. So how are the results looking as things come to a close?
As of May 5, with 83% of S&P 500 companies reporting results for Q1, 75% have beat the mean EPS estimate and 66% have beat the mean sales estimate, according to market research firm FactSet. The blended earnings growth rate for the S&P 500 is 13.5%, and if this rate of growth is achieved for the first quarter, it will mark the highest year-over-year earnings growth for the index since Q3 of 2011. Corporate earnings have been supporting gains here at home as well. With 94 Kospi companies reporting Q1 earnings, the accumulated profit is 26.2 trillion Korean won, 13.6% more than the estimate. If remaining companies meet market expectations, net income of Kospi companies is expected to break last year's record.
All right, thank you so much for the outlook today.
Thank you.
U.S. direct investment in Korean companies fell last year for the first time in 8 years. According to data from the Bank of Korea on Monday, U.S. direct investment in Korean companies decreased by 1% in 2016 from the year before to $33.9 billion. It's the first decrease since the financial crisis in 2008. Meanwhile, Korea's direct investment in the United States is on the rise. The figure reached $12.9 billion last year, up more than 120% from 3 years ago. A United Nations report warns that economic growth in Asia faces significant risk from rising levels of trade protectionism. According to a report by the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, 14 Asia-Pacific economies, including Korea, China, Hong Kong, and Russia, may see a drop in average growth this year by up to 1.2 percentage points. The UN agency said this is if Asian economies react with similar trade restrictions in response to those from advanced economies. The Commission says if growth drops, it will also take a toll on employment expansion as well, potentially shaving it down by about 0.3 percentage points. America's trade deficit grew in the first 3 months of this year, but it imported significantly less from Korea, possibly a sign of things to come. And further trade restrictions that might follow could hit some of Korea's core industries. Our Oh Soo-young takes a closer look.
It seems the Trump administration's drive to balance out its trade deficits has taken a substantial toll on Korean exports. Figures from the U.S. Commerce Department show its total trade deficit grew by $12 billion in the first quarter of this year, up 7.3% on year. But despite the bigger trade deficit, America's imports from Korea shrank by 25%, the biggest drop among the top 10 countries that have a trade surplus with the U.S. Imports from India, Italy and Germany also dropped in the same period, while shipments from Canada, Ireland and Mexico grew significantly. This comes amid concerns that the US may radically change or even terminate its bilateral trade agreement with Korea, as suggested by President Trump in an interview last week. On the 100th day of his presidency, Trump signed an order to review all trade agreements to ensure that they are in America's interest. The US administration is also considering imposing trade restrictions in a bid to protect homegrown companies in steel, aluminium, semiconductors and shipbuilding, all of which are core export industries for Korea. Seoul has since set up a task force to review the bilateral trade pact and formulate measures to cushion the impact of Washington's anti-dumping duties on foreign steel. Korea's Trade Minister Chu Young-an said last week that Korea is preparing for every possible scenario that the US may present, including a renegotiation. Oh Soo-young, Business Daily.
The technological advantage Korean companies have over their Chinese counterparts is fading quickly. According to the state-run think tank Korea Institute for Industrial Economics and Trade, in just 5 years, China's technology in sectors like cars, home appliances, and communication devices will be on par with that of Korea. Now, this comes as the world's second largest economy is pushing to comprehensively upgrade its industries in light of the Made in China 2025 initiative. The report adds that Korea needs to continue to develop new industries and products that set themselves apart from China while actively supporting various deregulation measures and improving existing systems. And while we're on the issue of developments here in China, the first freight train between China and Britain has recently completed its journey. And our Elliot Kim has more on the impact of this new service.
The train departed from Yiwu City in East China before arriving in London with Chinese-made goods. It then returned to Alitao Pass port in northwest China with European goods before it reached its final destination back in Yiwu City. It was the first train to make the 12,000-kilometer journey between the two countries.
The goods include 41 containers weighing about 210 tons. There are wine, baby food, and some mineral water in them. Goods related to food took up the largest proportion. These goods are popular in China, taking up 30 to 40% of our imported commodities. The China-Europe freight train is the first one that has set off from London, and this train transportation will become a regular service in the future.
The train is one of the new China-Europe freight trains developed as a part of China's One Belt, One Road initiative. Recently, China has made freight transport a topic of focus and has expanded its total number of cross-Eurasian rail routes to 51, while simultaneously increasing the operating speed of the rail in China from 80 to 120 kilometers per hour.
After this railway was completed, the orders for us traders got a little bigger. Because the freight goes over to European countries, the transportation period is shorter, so our orders will continue to grow.
Freight used to travel in only one direction, with the trains empty upon their return. But since the start of this year, freight now travels in both directions. Traders expect the more convenient shipping to help increase orders. Elliot Kim, Business Daily.
Stronger economic growth usually means more jobs, but Korea is seeing its employment figures go in the opposite direction. Our Hwang Ho-jun has the story.
A new report shows Korea's recent GDP growth isn't translating into more jobs. According to data from the Bank of Korea, Statistics Korea, and Korea Labor Institute, Korea's GDP to employment ratio, the number of workers per 1 billion Korean won, decreased 0.3 points last year from the previous year's 17.7, hitting a record low. The growth of employment relative to the growth of the economy also dropped to 0.42 from the previous year's 0.5. The manufacturing industry reflects the current phenomenon. The industry saw growth of 4.4% in the first quarter of this year, the highest since the second quarter of 2014. However, the number of jobs within the sector has been going in the opposite direction, dropping by the quarter and shedding about 112,000 jobs in the first quarter of this year alone. Experts attribute the decline to both temporary and structural factors. As for the temporary component, the government-led efforts to restructure the ailing shipbuilding and shipping industries are cited as a reason for the decline in the number of jobs, as troubled companies must reduce their labor forces to receive new funds. The structural factors cited include the increase of automation and companies moving production overseas. As of 2015, there are 531 industrial robots per 10,000 employees in Korea, which is the highest ratio in the world. The ratio of robots to American workers is at 176, about a third of that of Korea. Also, according to a recent report by the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry, foreign companies created 70,000 jobs in Korea from 2005 to 2015. During the same period, however, Korean corporations created more than 1.1 million jobs overseas. That means more than 6 times the number of jobs went overseas than coming into Korea. While there is no immediate solution, experts say that the government should focus on cultivating the service sector, which has a greater capacity to create jobs than the manufacturing sector. Hwang Ho-jun, Business Daily.
Meanwhile, the employment rate of senior citizens aged 75 and older here in Korea has been the highest among 25 other OECD countries for 5 consecutive years. According to an OECD report on Monday, the employment rate of that particular group of seniors was at nearly 18% as of 2015. Now, that's nearly 1 percentage point higher than Mexico. So with the exception of Korea and Mexico, ratios in other countries were in single digits, with European countries mostly sitting at the bottom of the list. The OECD average was 4.8%, over 13 percentage points lower than that of Korea. While this data can be seen as positive, as it could indicate the country has more active senior citizens, Korean experts point out that poor welfare and weak pension systems are in fact forcing the elderly to stay in the workforce even after retirement. As online bank transactions become more convenient, major banks here in the country are looking to close down more brick-and-mortar branches to cut costs. Our Lee Ju-young has more.
It may become increasingly hard to find brick-and-mortar banks here in Korea. According to the Financial Supervisory Service, 17 Korean banks, including KB국민, Shinhan, and Uribank, will close down a record 285 branches this year, leaving a total of 6,865 in operation. As non-face-to-face transactions are increasing, the reasons for maintaining costly stores are losing ground. Citibank Korea says it will slash its number of branches to nearly a sixth this year, from what was once 126, leaving just 21 in the Seoul metropolitan area and 1 branch each in 4 other major cities. These shutdowns are also affecting the number of new hires that banks can employ. While nearly 2,000 people were hired by banks back in 2013, that figure is expected to plunge to some 330 people this year. Not only that, KB국민, one of Korea's largest banks, had to lay off around 2,800 people at the start of the year. Experts say this comes as internet banking rapidly replaces existing services, with 81% of all transactions having been made online in the month of December alone. Offline transactions, on the other hand, accounted for less than 20%. While banks claim it's necessary to cut extra costs, market watchers point out it's ultimately the consumers who shoulder the inconvenience, particularly older people who are unfamiliar with new banking technologies. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
A level playing field for employment opportunities is important in helping people with disabilities to be independent and actively take part in their communities. And we shed light on a company that's taking the lead in this field.
An electronics company in Suwon, Gyeonggi-do Province. Workers are busy putting together wireless vacuum cleaners on the assembly line. But the majority of workers are on wheelchairs.
Of our 185 employees, 73% or 135 are disabled. About 63% of them have severe disabilities. These employees produce 13 products carrying our label and 17 products under our clients' labels.
The company was founded in 1994 with an aim to offer jobs for disabled people who are capable of working. It started out as an OEM of small electronic appliances supplying to well-known brands. Later in 2007, the company launched a wireless vacuum cleaner carrying its own label. Today, it manufactures a range of products from small electronics to digital devices, generating about $20 million in annual revenues. When asked about the secret of a successful business, the company's CEO points to its handicapped employees. Many of the company's disabled employees have worked here for more than 10 or even 20 years, thanks to the pleasant and supportive working environment.
I need to use crutches, so there are many inconveniences. But this company has convenient facilities and offers me a good work and life balance. That's why I continue to work here.
The entire premise is disabled-friendly, with rest areas, an employee cafeteria, and dormitory. There's even a resident nurse at the Health Services Center, which provides massages and physiotherapy. Byun Byung-nan from the after-sales service team came back from a maternity leave 3 years ago. She hopes to continue working for the company as long as possible.
I worked for many companies, but many of them lacked friendly facilities for the disabled. It was also hard for me to mingle with my coworkers. Here, we acknowledge each other's efforts, and I can be promoted in recognition of my performance. It's fulfilling, and it makes me work harder.
The electronics maker is also famous for its professional wheelchair basketball team, founded in July last year to help the employees share their passion for the sport. In Korea, there are about 60 professional sports teams for athletes with disabilities. But this marks the first case where a company's basketball club turned into a professional sports team. Wheelchair basketball is an extremely demanding sport that requires physical stamina and fitness. What makes these athletes hit the court?
Basketball helped me not only rehabilitate myself, but also relieve stress coming from my disability. I can sweat out my stress and be more sociable by meeting and communicating with different people. That's why I like wheelchair basketball.
Coach Ko Kwang-yup, who was a member of Korea's national wheelchair basketball team for 15 years, hopes more companies will follow suit and organize sports teams for handicapped players. He aims high for this year's National League.
Right now, the focus is on building teamwork and increasing physical strength. We are planning to gear up for the Wheelchair Basketball League taking place at the end of the year.
The electronics company helps disabled employees reach their full potential by facilitating support, welfare, and rehabilitation. Its CEO aims to drive growth and hire more handicapped employees.
I hope our annual revenues will grow fourfold or fivefold to $87 million US. Then we can hire 500 to 600 additional disabled employees. My goal is to make Mugunghwa Electronics a global leader that hires people with disabilities.
In this company, one's physical disability does not define what he or she is capable of. Everyone is given an opportunity to unleash their potential. The company says hiring the disabled gives slower but longer lasting and more profound results.
That wraps it up for today. And because tomorrow is Election Day here in Korea, Business Daily will be back on Wednesday. But Arirang News will be airing live coverage of the presidential election tomorrow, so don't forget to tune in then. Thanks so much for watching and see you soon.